Hello, welcome to episode number 211 of the ETPHD Team Podcast with myself and Georgia. Hi, Georgia. How are you?
Hello, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Good. I am well, thank you. And Anna, how are you?
I am good, thanks. All good.
Great. I just nearly blew off my bike. Did you know that could happen?
No,
Neither did I.
it's real windy though.
Very windy, and I think it's because I was going at like the speed of like a snail trying to get up a hill, and then the wind blew at me from the side, and I was like, "Whoa!" And I went like into the road direction, and I was like, "Oh, I didn't realize that could happen. Good to know. Pay more attention. Be a little bit faster. Nothing
I
more
was going to
humbling
say,
than
be a little bit faster, maybe.
Yeah, no, but do any of you cycle? Georgia, you do, don't you?
Yeah, I love cycling.
Yeah, but it's very humbling. Very humbling.
Mm-hmm.
I got my bike out for the first time this year last week. And then I went to the gym and I thought, I was going to have a heart attack. And it's a 7-minute cycle, but on the way it's uphill, but not even that steep. I thought, crikey, it's very humbling. You realise just how unfit you are when you do cycle or I guess run or do any sort of cardio.
Genuinely, do you know what? Do you know lockdown? There was very little that we could do outdoors apart from kind of cycle or run. So we cycled loads, but prior to lockdown, like I was teaching between a good week was like 3 spin sessions, but if it was a heavy week, I might do like 8 or 9 spin classes, and I would be like, really pushing myself most of the time. And it still doesn't even compare to going for a proper bike ride. Like if you go out for a decent hour or two, you come back and the next day your legs are just absolutely killing. And I'm like, why can't I do this in real life? Because on a spin bike, I'm amazing. But yeah, real life cycling is so hard.
I think it's the weather. I think it's just the wind. And yeah, let's go with that. It's not fitness, it's just the weather. It's wind.
Cycling into a headwind though is like cycling with loads of resistance. It's really hard. Like you think you're moving really fast and you look down and your legs are barely moving.
Okay, I'll take that from a spin instructor. It's obviously why cyclists just have like quads of steel and glutes of steel and one day it's never going to be me, is it? Anybody got anything exciting to share? We get on with the questions.
My exciting news is that, well, I shared it with you. I've accepted an offer on my house. So that's all I mentioned. And now it's just a case of waiting for things to do their thing.
Amazing. I'll miss your backdrop though. I'll miss your podcast backdrop.
I know, but it's going to be, I'm already planning like the office space because for the next one. So yeah, it'll be good. It'll be good. But I'm really going to miss my little cottage.
I do love it. From what I've seen of it, I think it's amazing. So I'm very happy for you, but also sad for the cottage. Okay. Well, great news. I nearly blew off my bike. You sold your house. It's a good time.
Have nothing going on in my life. So
you have nothing going on.
You guys.
What a week. Okay, let's get cracking on the questions. Anna, do you want to go first?
Yes, I'm pleased that Georgia's with us for this one. Any good resources on diet and exercise for peri-menopause?
Oh, it was as if it was planned.
I know.
Any good resources? That is such a good question because there are some great books out there that give you a really nice understanding of what's happening in your body, what's going on with your hormones, what to expect, how to cope with things. But from experience, there are very few that really cover much about sort of nutrition and exercise, because they're written usually by doctors and gynecologists, so they're coming at it from like a completely different angle. So what I'm saying is I have nothing exciting to give you in response to that.
What do you think of like all of the Davina McCall information?
Oh, that feels like a loaded question, but I'm sure she's not going to be listening to
it. Not loaded, because I haven't actually watched it, and I'm genuinely intrigued. There's no.
So I mean, the TV program is quite. I think it's quite a nice introduction. It's very relatable. She does go into some detail, but it's quite general, I would say. I did read her book, and I think that's a really great read because it's very much, I think, showing you that you're not alone with what you're going through. there's a lot of stories from other women, and I think when you're reading through it, you can be like, oh, okay, cool, like it's not just me, and okay, it can be more extreme than I'm experiencing, or for some people it's maybe less extreme, but I think it's just actually nice to hear from other women like what they're going through, because it's not something that gets talked about a huge amount. So I think the more you know, the better. And I think the more you understand things, the less crazy you think you are for feeling one way and thinking, oh, it's just me, when actually it can be, you know, how influential your hormones are. Yes, I'll leave
I
it
mean,
there.
I've never seen a fantastic resource around nutrition and training other than the stuff that we might put out, or Emma might put out, or some of the EIQ coaches will put out. That's really the best stuff that I've seen. In terms of online resources and stuff, like Dr. Jen Gunter is really great in terms of just her information. It's not necessarily nutrition and fitness, but she is great in terms of just talking about these things. That's her speciality, and she's a gynecologist, isn't she? So she's great.
I'd recommend her book, actually, if you do just kind of want to get to grips with a lot of what's going on. She's great for myth busting as well, and she's a fierce feminist, so I think it's a great place to start. Like you said, her Instagram, she's also got like articles on the gender, and yeah, her book I would definitely go for.
Okay. I know the only other thing I'd add to that is just being mindful of peri-menopause, periods, PCOS, endometriosis, autoimmune diseases, ADHD, neurodivergence. These classes of topics are very prone to misinformation, because people like to like specialize in one area and then they run out of things to say, so they overcomplicate things and they take a lot of mechanistic stuff and make it like recommendations. And that's why one of the reasons why I don't know of any really strong resources apart from people who can take the research and say, okay, well, so the research is, but this is actually what matters. And like a prime example of this is periods, when we know that mechanistically we should probably be stronger during our follicular phase, but realistically in human studies that doesn't happen. But you'll see a lot of really high profile female hormone specialists saying, you know, well, we'll take that and we'll train during the follicular phase and we'll deload during the luteal phase, and it's not actually what we see in human beings, but because it's their bread and butter and it sounds intelligent, and there's some mechanistic reasoning behind it. What I mean by mechanistic reasoning is kind of like looking at like why something might happen, and for example in that, like fluctuating levels of estrogen and progesterone, and the same can be true with perimenopause. So there are things that we can say, okay, well, mechanistically this might happen, or one study showed this one thing, and a lot of people who claim to be specialists in these areas will take that one study and then say, okay, well, you should change everything based on this. And that's really not what evidence-based practice is at all. It's like, okay, well, what body of research do we have? Do we have a meta-analysis, a systematic review? Do we have all of this stuff? Potentially lived experience, potentially experience with clients. What can we put all of that together and then make a recommendation? Not, well, I've seen one study, and unfortunately with any sort of specific group of people do like to pick like one thing and they say, oh, well, studies show this, but realistically it's just like one little study somewhere. So Georgia's your best source of information.
Thank you. I just want to go on that a little bit as well, just because you mentioned about like studies. There, again, without naming, there are a couple of people out there who have very successful books and they've appeared on very big podcasts, and they talk a lot about periods and hormones and menopause, etc. And I have read and listened and a few times thought, this is a little bit I just can't put my finger on it, but something isn't right. And when I've looked into it and I've looked into their background, they have no qualifications other than they've studied herbs and acupuncture. And I think it's just being really wary of where your information is coming from as well, because they can speak with a lot of conviction and they can talk the talk, and they can certainly sell stuff, but just be mindful of the background of these people as well.
Agreed. Okay, Georgia, question.
Yes, so this is from one of Roz's clients. She is asking, hunger and fullness cues, when can I trust them and when do they return with accuracy, or do they ever?
Great question. So I don't know the background of this person, obviously. We can, like, you're working with Roz, so maybe you're struggling with binge eating, maybe you're struggling with restriction. But really any disordered relationship with food. There are key times when you can't trust your hunger and fullness. That might be when you are you've had disordered eating for a long time, so maybe you've been chronically dieting, chronically restricting, or chronically overeating, or you have very low levels of body fat, or potentially relatively higher levels of body fat, because that can impact things like our leptin signaling, and leptin resistance, and so that can mean that we don't necessarily feel hunger when we're supposed to, or we feel more hungry than we're supposed to, or we get less satiated after meals, etc. So kind of quote unquote trusting them is not necessarily helpful. Also, if you're somebody who is chronically dysregulated, so you're kind of in that fight or flight mode regularly, or maybe you are hypoaroused, you're apathetic, maybe you're suffering with depression, it can be hard also to trust your hunger and fullness signals there, because that impacts parts of our brain that are responsible for interoceptive awareness. And so we're not able to recognize our hunger and fullness properly. So those are the times I would say be mindful of trusting things. I don't really like to say you can't trust your hunger and fullness ever, because it feels a little bit like, well, don't trust your body. But I'm trying to think of a better way to phrase it. Like, it's just your hunger and fullness. Your hunger and fullness might not be accurate. It's not that you can't trust them to be trying to tell you the right stuff. It's just that they might not necessarily be accurate because of the physiological changes that are happening underneath the surface.
Yeah, and I guess in terms of like how long it will take for you to be able to begin to eat in like and honor them, it's one of those things that you just can't compare. Like there's no expectation, but I think so long as you're being consistent with the work, it will come. But I know that's an annoying answer, because nobody can tell you how long these things are going to take, because ultimately none of us know the background, and everybody's completely individual.
What I would say on that is the only thing, think about there what you can control. And I mean healthy control. I don't mean, like controlling your food per se, but things like, okay, well, I recognize that I've been restricting for a really long time. So if I want my hunger and fullness cues to start to become more regulated, I'm going to have to stop restricting. So what can I control there? I'm going to actively increase my regularity of eating, my diversity of food, etc. Or I recognize that I'm really, I often feel quite stressed, and I overwork and I overtrain. Okay, well, what can I manage there? Okay, I can increase my rest days, or I can get to sleep earlier, or I can bring in some meditation into my practice. And so thinking about, okay, well, what might the reasons be based on all of those things, why I might be struggling to trust my hunger and my fullness, and what can I change? And because we can't change time's going to pass anyway, can't speed it up. So the only things that we can do is focus on, okay, well, what behaviors can I change? Okay. How helpful can it be to treat binge eating or regulating emotions with food as bad habits to break? Okay, so I think this means how helpful can it be to just change it as a habit, as opposed to potentially the more multifaceted approach of emotional regulation is never going to be something that you can change with a habit per se, but it's a good question, and I think that's what it means. Like, can you just sort of say, well, I'm going to break the binge eating habit by habit swapping. I'm going to change the binge eating habit to go for a walk or whatever it may be.
It's one of those ones, isn't it? Because you need to get that deeper understanding of what it is, and for some people it might be habit, but getting curious rather than just saying, right, I'm going to swap it out for whatever. If it is something deeper rooted, then that's not going to get to the root of the cause.
Yeah, I think I completely agree. I think it can be really tempting to call it a habit to break, because that's probably easier in the short term to accept and to manage. And like you said, Anna, for some people, overeating is a habit. For some people, so for some people, overeating is a habit. Actually, we had this discussion on EIQ recently where someone was saying, do you think the DSM should change the wording of binge eating because loss of control is very disempowering? And I was like, well, no, because it's not a mindset thing. It's not like, okay, well, let's just mindset your way out of binge eating. You can't just say, oh, I'm just going to choose to not feel like I have control, or I'm just going to choose that I feel like I have control, and then I'll just stop binge eating. It's a genuine feeling of loss of control, right? So I think it can be helpful to treat overeating for some people when it's a habit. Maybe you're in a habit of eating past fullness at nighttime. Maybe you're in a habit of eating mindlessly. Maybe you're in a habit of, just automatically having a bar of chocolate after dinner, and maybe it's not serving you anymore because you've got a fat loss goal or something like that. Then for sure, habit stacking, habit replacement, things like that can be really helpful. But if it's something that's like a learned behavior or a coping mechanism, it's not necessarily something that feels like an active choice. It might eventually. So you might start with some of the kind of deeper work around, why do I have these why do I have these tendencies, or what purpose are these things serving for me, and what is it that I'm fearful of feeling? All of these things you might start with, and learning to better regulate your emotions. But then over time it might be like, okay, well, now I realize that, okay, when I'm bored, I eat. I've recognized that I can break that, and you can come at that from a place of habit. So some of the stuff that I'll do now for myself personally is I can get into bad habits with food regularly. Not regularly actually, but I can get into bad habits with food where I'm like, oh, I've just noticed I've just always eaten chocolate after dinner. That's one of mine. And like, okay, that's just a habit that I need to break. I'm just going to replace it with having some like grapes or whatever for this week, and then that's fine, and that habit's broken. But if I'd said to myself 10 years ago, oh, just replace that chocolate that you're eating at night with grapes, I'd be like, absolutely not. So you need to kind of know where you're at. Okay, Anna?
Yeah. How do you rest? I often have split shifts. So this client is a PT, and during the day I am very tired, which makes me want to eat. I struggle with lying down and switching off when I know I have work later.
Well, one thing I will say is Becca and Roz did a podcast on rest recently. So I would listen to that. I mean, I personally would get outside and get some fresh air, and it doesn't, even if it's miserable weather, I would still get out, look at the sky, I'd look at the trees. I would not look at my phone, or I'd put on My Therapist Ghosted Me, or my current also favourite is The Therapy Crouch, also excellent.
Oh, I've just started listening.
Oh, it's so good. I was like, oh, what am I going to think of this? But I love Abby Clancy. I think she's great. But her and Peter Crouch, it's very funny. Did you like it?
I've only listened to one, but I really I was the same. I was like, I'm not sure if I'm gonna get on with this, but I just lolled the whole way through. So
yeah, it's very good. So if you think about something that you can think about is like the 7 types of rest, and I always forget at least 2 of them. Anyone got them off the top of their head? I'm just going to Google them otherwise.
You should know this.
I know. So there's like sensory rest, social rest, physical rest, mental rest, creative rest, spiritual rest. Have I said that already? I think that's it. Yeah. Emotion. I said that. Yeah, that's 7 types of rest anyway. And run through those and think about, well, how can I create a restful space if it's not going to, maybe you won't have physical rest in that moment because you can't, like, you don't want to lie down, you're a bit stimulated. Okay, so maybe you can have creative rest. Maybe you could, like, I don't know what you could do in the middle of the day that would be creative rest. Maybe you could do some journaling
Colouring
or some
in.
writing. Pardon?
Colouring in.
Colouring in, yeah.
Mm.
Never read a colouring in except with Alba. But yes. You could, like, get out in nature. What would that class as? I'm not quite sure. But yeah, run through those and think, well, how could I create rest in a different area? Rest doesn't just have to be sitting down. Maybe it's social rest, and actually you can phone your mum, or maybe you've had so much social time that actually you need silence, and that's your rest, depending on what your day's been like. If you're a PT, it may well be that you've actually had so much social time that you just want silence.
I think considering what you're thinking of rest as well, like rest, like you were saying, rest isn't just lying down, but if you are feeling kind of mentally tired from being on the go with your clients and all the conversations and any programming, that sort of thing, like, for me, rest is switching off and doing something immersive in that sense. So absolutely, like, in terms of getting out for a walk and fresh air, but equally rest for me is baking and bits of self-care and other things that just allow that downtime where I'm not really thinking and putting a lot of effort into anything, and just, like, restorative in that sense, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think sometimes people have this idea that rest means a lack of productivity, and that, first of all, that isn't really true, but that a lack of productivity is a bad thing. Like, you cannot be productive 24/7. It's like when you say, I have to focus on 100 things. Well, you're really not focusing if you're trying to do 100 things at once. Like, focusing on one thing, like single tasking, is far more productive than trying to do 5 things at once, which I can confirm I have regularly tried in the past and been like, why am I not succeeding at any of these things at once? But yeah, I think maybe removing the pressure of your idea of rest being unproductive or useless. I think a lot of people struggle with that from time to time.
Okay, Georgia.
Next one is from Becca's client. Does caffeine have any effect on performance or your hunger?
So caffeine's a funny one, right? Because realistically, like, if you look at the research around sports performance, the recommendations are 3 to 5 milligrams per kilogram body mass. Like, I think it's 30 to 60 minutes before an event to get some benefit, which is actually quite a lot. If you imagine that I'm trying to think of some math here. Imagine that you are 80 kilos and you have 5 milligrams, that's 400 milligrams. That's quite a lot. A home coffee is probably about 80 to 100. So it's like 4 home coffees potentially. So when people are like, oh, I'm going to have a Monster as the pre-workout, which I've done many a time, realistically in a Monster, I think it's only something like, I want to say maybe 150 milligrams, I think. But it's still some caffeine, but in terms of the research, I don't think there's any research to say that something as low as 150 milligrams, unless you're in a small body, is particularly beneficial for performance. But you do get a bit of a placebo effect if you convince yourself that you're having your caffeine or your pre-workout. But even pre-workouts often will have like 80 milligrams of caffeine in them. So I remember when I was competing and I actually did need the caffeine before I was training, and I would have like a pre-workout and a coffee, potentially 2. It was ridiculous. But technically that would be the right amount according to like the research. So, but the other thing to think about is that if you're a habitual user of caffeine, but if you habitually drink coffee or drink Monsters and things, energy drinks, then you do become habitualized to that. So me having a coffee versus someone who drinks like 3 coffees a day having a coffee, the impact of that is really significantly different. And I would get much more of a buzz or a hit from that than someone who consistently drinks coffee. So if you're somebody who always drinks caffeine, and then you're like, oh, I'm going to have one pre-workout, it's probably not going to make much difference at all, which is one of the reasons why I would always recommend, if you are someone that has caffeine, like having a week off where you don't have any caffeine at all can be really, really helpful. In terms of appetite, I think the research is really equivocal. Equivocal means debatable, right? I think that's the right phrase. Some people will see slight reductions in appetite. Some people don't. It doesn't tend to impact overall energy intake day to day in terms of what we know from the research. So, and again, that's going to depend on if you habitually have it. And then some people will have it instead of meals, which is silly, but it will reduce calorie intake, but it's not necessarily changing anything to do with your hunger levels.
It's just filling up on a hot drink, really, isn't it? And kind of filling some time in between your next meal.
Okay. Lynn's question: best ways to quiet an active mind when you are trying to meditate?
Stop trying to.
Yeah.
I mean, you're the meditation pro, but that's what always comes to me. I know I've spoken about this one before, but when I listen to Michael Singer, and I think it's called like, it's a podcast episode, but it's just one of his talks, and I think it's called like surrendering to the waters of the mind. I think it's something like that. Yeah. Ooh. And it's about meditation, and like how so many people think you're doing it wrong because you're meant to, like, they have the perception that you sit down and you're trying to empty your mind, and he's like, no. And I know you talked about this, like this Emilia, was your like mindfulness without even realizing it, and he likens them to being like clouds, and you have the thoughts, they're like clouds, you let them pass, you're not trying to fight them and judge yourself because you're doing it wrong. It just is.
I totally agree. I think, like you said, stop expecting it. I think sometimes we fall into this kind of narrative of, well, I'm not doing it right because my mind's so loud, so I shouldn't do it. And it's like, I remember going to meditation class in Santa Monica once when it was actually at Unplugged Studio, and it was Lauren Ekstrom, who I love, and I remember I loved it because I would be like, oh, listen to her voice on the app and never get to be there in person. But I remember her saying vividly, the days that are the hardest and the loudest to meditate are the days that are most important to meditate. And I thought, well, okay, if that's like that all of life, then that means that every day is the most important time to meditate, because the idea is not to empty your mind. The idea is just to notice and come back to your breath. So the way to quiet an active mind is, one, not to try and quiet it, but two, is to use your anchor. And so we use the breath as an anchor because everyone has it and it's accessible, it's free, it's always there. So when you notice that your mind is wandering, you come back to that anchor of your breath. And as I said before, one of my clients years ago said, when I realized that meditation was like doing reps for my brain to strengthen my brain, every time I came back to my breath, it was one rep. It changed the way that I thought about meditation. And I was like, I really, really loved the way that she phrased that, and I use it to this day. But if you struggle to anchor things to your breath, you could anchor to, so that's why some people love guided meditations, because they anchor to the person's voice. So whenever you find your mind wandering, come back to that person's voice. If you are trying maybe a walking meditation, you could anchor to like your feet on the ground, or you could anchor to like sights, sounds, etc. That's one of the reasons I really love what we call noting meditations, which are just basically like a meditation which you can do sat down, but it's much more interesting if you're doing it on a walk, and you note what you if you're thinking, you note thinking. If you're looking at something, you note seeing. If you smell something, you note smelling. If you feel something, you note feeling. You're not getting lost in what that is. You're just saying, oh, noted, thinking, okay, come back to the breath. And then it's like, okay, what's next? Oh, hearing, noted, and then come back to your breath. And I really like that too, because it's a bit more active, and it removes the judgment of getting distracted, because it's like you're just noting that you're getting distracted. That's part of the meditation. So you could try something like that if you struggle with it too.
And also stop thinking that you have to be good at it as well. Like, I don't know if you guys have similar, but a lot of my clients will say, oh, I'm not good at it. So I don't know why I'm bothering. And it's that kind of perfectionist mindset again, where actually the doing it is what's important, not the being good at it. Like if I had to be good at everything I did, I probably wouldn't do a huge amount.
Yeah, we'd all just be at home like, oh.
Yeah, the more you practice, the less worried you become about it, I think.
And there's no wrong way of doing it. The only wrong way of meditating is just not doing it. There's no good way of doing it or bad way of doing it. Anna, question.
How to find more joy in my life when I am drowning in work, childcare, no time, housework. I'm so overwhelmed. I feel myself forgetting words and I feel like I have dementia.
Oh, that feeling when you forget words, that's a sign. You know it. We've all been there. Oh, it's tough, right? Because this is obviously a very, very busy season of your life, and hopefully it is just a season of your life and it's not something that is for the next 20 years. If it were me, I would try and actively look for like little pockets of joy, like just 5 minutes. For me, a pocket of joy when I'm really busy, it might be like, again, it might just be putting on my therapist goes to me whilst I'm putting my washing away, or having a dance in the morning to Little Mix or Taylor when I'm making my coffee. Like little things like that, moving my body, or just being silly. What I was thinking the other day actually is, and I don't know if you guys have felt this, but yoga has really allowed me to be more silly with my body. Like I am naturally like kind of lanky, awkward. I can't dance.
We can't relate, no.
Can't dance, can't do any of these things. And I when I take up space, I do it really awkwardly. But I was in yoga the other day and I had my eyes closed and I was doing like cat cows, and they were doing the thing of like, just move your body in the way that you want. And I remember when I first started yoga, I would feel so awkward doing stuff like that, and I would just continue on doing like cat cow. And then the other day I was like, screw this, and I was like feeling into it, and I thought, and I had a moment of like, oh, gosh, I wonder what this looks like. And then I just kept on going, and I thought yoga has been so good for me to allow me to just not feel so self-conscious about my body. And I don't mean the way that my body looks. I don't feel that self-conscious. I don't mean body image. I mean the way that I move and like my awkward gestures and stuff like that. Now I feel a lot more comfortable with them, which has been amazing. Have any of you realized that or felt like that?
Yeah, definitely. Like I think even at home I wouldn't like not express, but you know, like you say, like just having a little dance around, or when you've got loads of energy, just jiggling about. But I wouldn't do that, and now I'm like, well, why not? And I don't know whether that's, I think like you said, part of it is just being less self-conscious, but I think part of it also comes down to the body connection in, this is what I'm feeling and I feel like I need to move.
Yeah, great point. So yeah, I would look for like the little pockets of joy, what hiccups, the little pockets of joy in your day that you can find. And it doesn't have to be anything active, although it might be something like dancing or whatever, but a snippet of a podcast, or sometimes mine might be like watching 10 minutes of Friends, even if it's 10 o'clock in the morning when I'm having my coffee. Something that makes me laugh is like a little pocket of joy when I'm really busy. Or what would you guys say?
I'd say like if it's the brain fog thing where you're struggling to think and you're struggling to speak, I mean, I can completely relate to that most days. But I actually find the smallest thing is having a cup of tea and just standing in the garden. Like when the weather is nice, I love walking around the garden just for 5 minutes while I drink my tea, because it's a break from your screen, it's a break from your phone, it's some daylight, fingers crossed, depending on the weather. But even if the weather's awful, if you can put your dressing gown on and take your cup of tea outside, like that can just make such a big difference. You know, you're getting a bit of fresh air, you can hear the birds, and there's just something really resetting about that. And I find that sometimes, you know, if you are super busy, and I mean, brain fog's something that I get quite a lot when my migraines are really kicking in. It's having actually a lack of stimulation that is refreshing for me. It's almost like when you're super busy, there's so much going on, you've got emails, you've got this, you've got that, you're thinking about other people and family and all sorts, and if you can just have a moment where actually you're just in this little bubble of no stimulation, that can be enough to kind of reset and come back and feel that you can remember why you walked into a room and remember the words that you were going to try and use, and feel like you're kind of focused again instead of sort of frayed in multiple directions.
Totally agree. So nothing more soothing than silence, or birds, but just silence. Even if you have to do it at work and go to the toilet. I used to do that all the time. Just close my eyes on the toilet and be like
Do you know what I used to do as well, like even when I was waitressing, and I don't know if anyone else can relate to this because I'm not a smoker, I've never smoked, but I would get really frustrated that people who smoked would get these cigarette breaks during the day, and I was like, all right, well, do you know, I'm just going for my non-cigarette break right now, and I will go and stand outside for as long as it takes for someone's cigarette to burn, and if that's 5 minutes, I would do that, and people would be like, oh, you can't do that, and I was like, watch me. I'm going to. Because I think we forget as well, like when somebody's taking a cigarette break, they have to go outside, they're getting a few minutes of daylight, and they've got that deep breathing. I'm not saying take up smoking, but maybe go outside and take some deep breaths. Yeah, so even, you know, someone who's really busy, if they smoke, they will make time to go outside and smoke. So maybe setting yourself some non-cigarette breaks. And it's something that I have in my day. Actually, I have 10 minutes twice a day outside of my lunch break, that in my diary is blocked out, and I protect that. I'm like, oh, it's my tea break, and I go make my cup of tea and I run off with a big smile on my face, like, oh, daylight. And you just have that kind of few minutes where it's just for you. And yeah, lovely.
Just gonna add, because I think, you know, when people realize they're like, I just don't have a lot of joy in my life, and there's that oh my god, this is not okay, I think take some pressure off. You've like noticed that, that's fantastic, but also be mindful, obviously, in all the work, and this isn't just for this client, but in all the work that we're doing in increasing vulnerability and becoming more open to feeling your feelings and not distracting yourself from feeling the not so good, uncomfortable feelings. You're opening yourself up to, yeah, feeling those, but also feeling all the good ones too. So I think with more patience as well, you will begin to feel that joy a lot more naturally, rather than kind of trying actively to seek it out.
Love that. Whose question is it?
I think that one was mine. So
okay, Georgia. Wait, yeah, Georgia.
This is one of my clients, and she's asked, how can I become better at making decisions? A simple question.
Oh, so simple. It depends why you struggle making decisions in the first place. Is it because you procrastinate on them because you're scared of making the wrong decision? Is it because you just always make what feels like the wrong decision? It depends on, I think it depends on why you're making the decisions, like what's wrong with the decisions that you are making.
I think with this client, it's a little bit of overthinking and not always knowing specifically what it is that she wants. So something that we're working on is actually identifying your values, but your true values, not the ones that you think I want to hear or that other people expect of you. And when you know what's important, it can be a little bit easier to make decisions that feel like, oh, well, this actually takes me closer to this or feels good to me. Obviously not every decision in life is a values-led decision, but I think that comes with getting to know yourself a bit better and knowing when you'd like to say no, or knowing what it is that you genuinely want, because this client is definitely relates to being a people pleaser. Not that we can relate.
I think as well, like obviously with what you were saying, Georgia, on the values, like the more you connect to your values, the more you connect to your body. Like it took me a long time to like go by what my gut was telling me, and I think that's a surefire way. Like, even if the decision you make isn't kind of one that is necessarily the best one at that time, your body tells you, and that's just okay. That's a learning curve. Was that an instance where I was putting other people's needs before myself? Was that a decision I made because I was letting my boundaries slip? And listening to your body in that sense, it's so that it's just more information that you can go, right, okay, now's the time that I do make decisions for me.
I would like to add on that, when you people please, you are making decisions for you. Like, you're not we
hate you when you do this.
No, but I say it to myself, because I say it to myself every single day. People pleasing is selfish. You're doing it to please yourself. You're not doing it like you're pleasing you're trying to please others, because pleasing others pleases yourself. And as soon as you own that and be like, okay, well, I'm saying that I'm doing all this stuff for other people, but it's only to make myself feel better, you may as well then do something that actually does make you feel better, rather than something that is not necessarily the best thing for you because you think it helps other people, because ultimately you're doing that to please yourself. I think that's important to remember. I also think sometimes we procrastinate on decisions. Like, think about, if you're not making, like, you're procrastinating on decision making, remember that every time you're not making a decision, you're making a decision by not making a decision. Like, you're still making a decision, it's just not a helpful one. Because I think sometimes, I've definitely done this in the past, and I've spoken to clients about this, where they're like, oh, I might do this or I might do that, and it's like, okay, well, right now you're choosing not to do it. Right now you're choosing not to do anything at all, and that's fine, but own that and stop hiding behind, oh, well, I'll figure it out, it'll just come to me. It probably won't. The right answer to these types of decisions probably won't come to you until you make a decision and you find out if it was the right one or the wrong one. But even if it feels like it was the wrong one, you did the best, you made the best decision with what you knew at the time, and then when you know better, you do better. Getting more comfortable with making bad decisions, or say bad decisions, what shall we reframe it as? Learning decisions. Getting more comfortable with that is so important, because you're going to balls up all the time. You're going to fail. You're going to make bad decisions, and the universe will keep giving you the same lessons over and over again until you learn and you do something different. We know all this, so you may as well just get comfortable with the fact that, like, you might make a decision that's not necessarily the right one. Reflect on it and say, okay, well, what will I do next time? Because otherwise you spend your whole life in this area of, like, stagnation and not really doing anything, and then a year's gone by and you look back and you think, oh gosh, I didn't really make any decisions properly that were helpful, because I spent the whole time thinking, oh, should I do this or should I do that? And it doesn't sound like it's a procrastination thing with this person. It sounds like it's more maybe a people-pleasy type focus. But again, like, this isn't a dress rehearsal, this is your life. And one day you're going to wake up and think, gosh, did I really spend my entire 20s and 30s and 40s for other people and actually haven't accomplished anything that I wanted to do myself? Like, how does that make me feel? Because probably not going to feel amazing. Well, it might. You might feel like a selfless queen, who knows? But I certainly would not want to think about, you don't want to live with regret, right? Me. Is it me? It's this question. I would love to hear your thoughts on procrastination. Weird. And the best ways of identifying and combating this type of behaviour, and how to find more focus at work. Well, that was weird. Some of the stuff that I just said would fit into that pretty well. I read this thing once and it said, often we procrastinate because it's a much more peaceful place to live, telling ourselves that we can do it all, than accepting that actually we could fail, or we'd have to sacrifice something to get that thing that we say we want. And the example was, I can't remember where I read this, it might have been 4,000 Weeks, but the example was this guy who, okay, this is not the example, but this is the best that I can remember from this example. He was like a guy, I want to say like the Cleopatra times when she was alive, and it was a guy who was like taking over all of these countries. You can see, can't remember the story. He's taken all of these countries over, and he was in love with Cleopatra. He was writing loads of love letters and stuff, but they never actually met up and got married and had babies and stuff like that, because what he was doing was, if he met up with her in real life, he would have to, like, one of them would have to sacrifice the country that they owned and move to another country and stuff, right? And it would be a sacrifice of that nature. So what they were doing was saying, well, I'm in love, I've got this amazing relationship, and I own all of these countries. I'm basically living my best life in every single way, and procrastinated on making the decision of then getting married and having babies, because it was much easier to say, well, I've got it all, than it was to make that decision and accept that you can't physically have it all. And I ran through this when I was looking at like my egg freezing and stuff, and I was like, am I putting it off because I'm telling myself that I can have a baby on my own and still run all of my businesses and still go to the gym and still meditate all the time and do all this stuff? Because if I tell myself I can do it, but I don't actually have to go through with starting a family on my own, then I can be like, yeah, I can do it all. Whereas if I actually then went through with it, I'd have to realize that I can't physically do it all. And sometimes that might be a reason why we're procrastinating. And I had to call myself on it. Like, is that why I'm putting this off? It wasn't, but it was a useful tool to work through.
I was talking to a client about procrastination because it was something that she was struggling with. Like, she was finding she just started a new role at work, and after lunch would be procrastinating. And for her, it was exploring the different types of like the reason why you might be procrastinating. And I've just pulled it up. So we were talking about the 4 types of procrastinator: the performer that forces themselves to focus by shrinking the time they have to tackle a task, and the reason behind that being perfectionism. The self, what's that, sorry?
Attacked.
Yeah. The depreciator, opposite of lazy. So when they don't do something, they're extra hard on themselves, and what they really need is to be more compassionate. The overbooker, again, can't relate. And the biggest challenge there is creating chaos to avoid facing what you know you need to face right now. And the novelty seeker, that they end up inadvertently losing a lot of time and burning out because they don't take consistent action to see the results.
Interesting.
And I thought that was quite useful because it's going to be different for everybody, and potentially as well falling into different ones, and then being able to identify, right, this is where I'm at right now, what do I need to do to kind of pull myself out of this little phase that I'm in.
Yeah, I was going to say, but now I feel very attacked. I was going to say, in terms of finding focus at work, like into my psyche now, I quite like to have a list of, what it is that I need to do that day or that week, and anything that doesn't get done gets carried over to the following day. But I actually set time aside in my diary each morning for like fiddly things. So I just call it admin, and it's like, okay, anything that is, 5 to 10 minutes, including things like emails, etc., just kind of get that done. So I know that I've got that time. And then I have another portion after my lunch break as well, which is like, okay, this also ticks these things off. And then I have other blocks during the day. Now I feel like I'm maybe a bit anal about this kind of thing. I have other blocks during the day where I get certain tasks done. And I do give myself that time limit, because I think for me, when it comes to procrastination, if it's like, oh, well, I've got 3 weeks to do this, then I will take 3 weeks to do it and get it all done last minute. But if I'm like, okay, well, this is the hour where I can kind of work through this, I will get it done in that hour. But like I said, your list has made me feel like perhaps that's the type of procrastination. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's Parkinson's law, right? You take as long as you've got, and if you give yourself that long, then that's how long it's going to take you to do it. So I think, yeah, time blocking is amazing. And that's kind of what you're explaining there, Georgia. It's just time blocking of like, well, I'm going to do this at this time and this at this time. And often we set deadlines far in advance, but it's like, well, what's your deadline for the next 30 minutes? What's your deadline? Set yourself imaginary deadlines. Say imaginary, but like they are deadlines that you've set for yourself, so that you're holding yourself accountable to things. And there's like a matrix called like the Eisenhower matrix. We're actually talking about this at Level Up, where you split your jobs into like must do now, could do now, must do later, that type of thing. Like basically figure out what's urgent and what's not, and set deadlines for the things that are urgent that day and focus on them. Also make sure like you're turning off your distractions. Realistically, if I was checking my phone every time I was doing updates, I would be doing check-ins till like all day for, 5 clients, because you just get so distracted by stuff. Emails are coming through all the time, phone messages are coming through all the time, social media. Turn it off. There's loads of apps these days that you can like limit your that set time limits on your phone, or certain apps. I don't use them. I just put my phone on airplane mode sometimes. If you have desktop WhatsApp, shut it down. Put your earphones on, like AirPods, stick them in, or any like earphones that are a bit noise cancelling, so you're not getting distracted by other stuff. Or listening to certain music can be really helpful, like Kaigo piano I love for focus still. But like listening to some focusing music. When I was baking with my niece last week, she's 3 and a half, and I said, okay, let's put some music on, what we're going to listen to, and she was like, focusing music. And I was like, oh, she said, Dad always listens to focusing music when he's doing stuff. So we had focusing music on when we were doing cupcakes, and our cupcakes were excellent, so she knows. She knows. So yeah, just like be a bit accountable and like to those types of habits that you've got. Okay, one last question, I think. Anna.
Should we finish with what is one thing you want to try, like an activity or experience that you've not yet?
Snowboarding for me. And I keep saying I want to do it, and I've never done it. And it's just because I haven't pulled my finger out to like go to a class, because there's a dry ski slope near me in Manchester that I could easily do. I just haven't done it. I think because I'm scared, and also because I don't know if anyone would come with me, and I don't know if I could do it on my own, and that's pathetic. So therefore, now I've said it out loud, I will have to do it. That's my thing.
I was thinking when you said it, I was like, what, actual snow? Because like rain after.
I know, tell me about it. Well, I'd do a dry ski slope first, and if I could do it, which I hear is very hard, but it can't be that harder than surfing and
You know what? I've heard it's easier than skiing.
Oh, really?
And if you skateboard as well, like
yeah, skateboard.
I know it's not the same, but I feel like it.
But if I can surf, I mean, I say I can't surf, I can stand for 5 seconds and then fall off. So I feel like I should be able to do it. Maybe I just go to like a group class where you can go on your own. Mm-hmm. What's yours?
I think something that I've not done. I do want to try surfing. I really want to try it. I think I'll be absolutely awful, and I'm low key like, I don't know, the sea, but yeah, no, I'll give it a go.
They always give you wetsuits when you do it as a class, and the good thing about surfing
class, my own, haven't I? That I got stuck in.
Of course you do. How could I forget? Yeah, it is great. And then they're like, oh, it's just like meditation, and you're like, okay, it doesn't really help. But I think the idea is that you're just like at one with the ocean, and then not to overthink it, which is impossible.
I think it'd be more like a bodyboard for me. I think that's where I'd be at. And that would be fine. I'd be more than happy with that. I just need to get over the fear of getting in the sea.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have a huge fear of water, specifically the sea, because it moves a lot, right? It has a lot of power. So my thing would be, I would like to try open water swimming, but not in the ocean. I think I'd like to do a lake or a very lazy river or something like that, because it will really challenge me, but in a good way. Like, my fear of water is so bad that I will struggle to get in a swimming pool if there's nobody else in the pool, or if lots of people are swimming and the water is moving a lot. Like, it really freaks me out. So the more I do it, like the calmer I feel and the easier it becomes. So I think I would like to try outdoor swimming, because I like the idea of being able to go and do it, but I know it would take me a bit of time to kind of get to a place where I'm quite literally not having a panic attack. But yeah, it would be great.
That's wholesome.
Well, when you're up, Georgia, for the event in May, there's a place near me. We can go together. I'm going next weekend.
Really? Okay, you go try it out and we'll go.
I will. I'll let you know. I'll let you know.
Okay, 5 questions, everyone. Thank you both so much.
Thanks.
Bye.